Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining into our Zoom discussion called Freedom Talk. It is March the 4th, 2021, and this is Andy Kaufman, Stefan Lanka, Tom Cowan, and Dean Braus. All of you are well known for your outstanding commitments, integrity, and for pointing out things to people where many others are afraid to speak up. I would ask everyone to reflect your ideas about a quote and then afterwards on some topics that are to follow. The quote I will display afterwards so the viewers can see it. I will read it to you. It's from Plato. We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light. Tom, would you start please with your thoughts about this?
Yeah, that's an interesting quote. So I think how I would interpret that is if human beings, man or woman, is afraid of finding the truth, then that becomes problems. And you know, I don't want to say like I'm some paragon of any virtue here, but if I think back to how I got to understand what it is that I understand, I think somewhere in me, or maybe I made the commitment to not, I don't know if the right word is caring, but so I would get to a subject and I ended up not really caring which was the correct answer. In other words, if we want to talk about like bacteria or virus causing disease, there's a whole narrative that they do, but I went into it thinking, well, there's certain, let me examine the evidence. And if the evidence is that bacteria cause disease, then I'll believe that and maybe give people antibiotics. And if the evidence is that they don't, then I'll think that we should think about something else. And I didn't have any what I call dog in the race, because if it was one way or another, I don't know why I should have cared. Just because everybody was telling me it was one way, that never persuaded me. And so as you start learning science, I kept hearing things over and over again, which just frankly didn't make any sense to me, from logic, common sense, or even, you know, what I started learning as scientific reasoning. And what seemed to me was my fellow students and my fellow eventually doctors, they would believe it anyways, and even make up these wild theories as to how this must be true. And I can give you an example, and I'll try to be quick about it, that really was one of the first times I remember this, and I told this to Andy the other day. So I was, you know, a pretty good student in college, and I was invited into this graduate level genetics class with a guy who had been like 6-time teacher of the year at Duke, and apparently nominated for a Nobel Prize for elucidating the 3-dimensional structures of proteins, and particularly how DNA is folded. And what we mean by that is you see chromosomes, right? And then at other times you don't see the DNA. So it's just in strands somewhere in the nucleus or the cytoplasm. And his whole research was, how do these long strands of DNA fold themselves and to make these tiny little chromosomes, right? So that was the subject. So he was a brilliant teacher. He makes an experiment in the room. He puts up stands all over the room, and then he puts string all around the room. And the string is supposed to represent the long strands of DNA. And then he gets a thimble like this big, and he starts taking the string and carefully folding it and to put it into the thimble. And he said that in reality, the string would go another 10 times around the room if it was to scale. And so he gets about 1.5 times around the room, and then he can't put any more string in the thimble. And then he says, isn't it a miracle that nature knows how to put this long strand of string in the thimble? It's just miracle. And everybody in the room erupted like, oh my God, life is so miraculous. And I even remember where I was sitting in the classroom and I said to myself, excuse my French here, but something like, what the hell? He just showed me that you can't stick this much DNA into that thimble. He literally disproved the whole thing right there. And I didn't know like how that DNA gets into the thimble or into a chromosome, or even whether it does. But I was 100% sure at that time that this thing is nonsense. There is no magical force that puts long strands of DNA into a thimble or into a chromosome. Now, I don't know, I didn't know at the time whether the chromosome doesn't have all the DNA or there's something wrong with the length or something. And over my entire career, I kept finding these things, and then people making up essentially magical, and I like magical actually could be a good word, like creative solutions, but they're not really creative solutions. They're just nonsense. And yet somehow we have this whole system of medicine and science where we believe in nonsense. And for some reason in me, I just could never get myself to believe that. And that's where I ended up where I am today.
Thank you. Stefan, do you want me to read it first so you can bring your thoughts to it, or do you remember?
Well, no, I have printed it out, and for me, this warning of Plato is about two things. It's clear when you yourself identify with something, for example, that the DNA is wrapped 10 times, or whatsoever, and somebody comes and says, no, this is not possible, and it's anti-logic. But if you identify yourself with such a notion and you are a teacher of genetics or a researcher, then it's hurting your identity, and it really hurts.
Yeah.
And then it makes you very aggressive. This is the thing which Plato meant, right? And Plato was in this time where the Greek philosophy changed from a holistic point of view to the pure materialistic point of view of Democritus and Epicure. And in a lot of time, he criticized this very much. For example, he said, Plato, that most of the Greek doctors can't deal with most of the diseases because they forgot the most important thing, the soul. And we have a lot of criticism of Plato in this kind, and what he said is what he's experienced. Because if you say something which you have a proof for it, but it violates the other point of view, then adults are scared of, and they are frightened. And this is what Plato is saying. It's the light, right? And another aspect which comes into my mind is that, of course, you don't like to see something when you know that you should act accordingly. I mean that you have a responsibility. And so to keep things away, it's not to know it, because if you know it, you should act accordingly. And this is another reason I found why people prefer to look away, or, anyway, so those are the 2 points which came to my mind when I saw this sentence of Plato. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Andy.
Morning, Dean, and Tom and Stefan. And Dean, thank you for putting so much thought into this discussion today. So I think it is a very interesting quote from Plato that we're discussing, and that we all have a slightly different take on it, but all of our interpretations, I think, are very compatible. So I see this as kind of a discussion about morality. And I agree with Tom that the light represents the truth. And what happens when you expose yourself to the light or take it in is that you illuminate the shadow elements. And I think that the shadow elements represent the parts of us that have maybe reacted to trauma or programming, and but represent the dark side, the immoral aspects, the triggered behavior. And if you want to apply this to the modern situation, think about physicians practicing medicine. You know, essentially they have to go through this process of, you know, kind of programming or hazing, desensitization to death, dying, violence, and suffering in order to be able to dole out what really amounts to poisons on a day-to-day basis. And if they really looked at that and let in the full light on what they're being asked to do and what they're doing on, you know, every day to people by causing additional suffering and death, it would be extremely challenging to accept that. And you, of course, you'd have to immediately change your behavior. You would have to, you know, probably go through a period of repentance and such. And, you know, I think Tom and I had this experience from a clinical perspective over time and gradually. And, you know, we did make it through to the other side. So there is definitely things are much better, you know, when you shed more light on the situation. But it's a very, very risky and you know, fearsome thing for most people to even take a look where they might be hiding in the shadow.
So that's a great transition to the next questions I wanted to ask you all. If you could tell people what they could do to reach a better understanding about viruses and biology in general, what would this be? So maybe maybe Andy, you can follow up here.
Sure. Well, you know, I think there's a couple of different aspects to consider for this. And one is just realizing that as a human being, that you have intelligence and that you, everyone, you know, is able to understand things about the world and about nature and how it works. And our scientific establishments and academic establishments have created a vocabulary that is akin to an occult, you know, practice almost, that it's very difficult to enter because you have to, you know, learn this, decipher this code and this language. And this is really unfortunate, but the truth is that, you know, it can be done with a little bit of rigor. And I think people can pool resources together to do this. You know, just like we have been doing, you know, independently and collaboratively with each other. And, you know, my goal really is to make this material the true understanding of what's going on in science and what true science really means. It is accessible to everyone. And I further believe that people are capable of actually designing and conducting their own experiments to learn more and contribute to our collective understanding. And a lot of people have done this and, you know, generally go unrecognized in the mainstream, but it's very, very important. So to, you know, instill confidence into people that they really can understand this more, you know, what seems very intimidating, but it's within your abilities. And then the second aspect I think is really important. One could call developing discernment. And how I would describe this, and you know, this may be somewhat of an esoteric term, but it really is crucial, which is being able to tell if the information that you're being exposed to or you're taking in, you know, is it trustworthy? Is it valid? Is it reliable? Is the source trustworthy, valid, and reliable of the information? And this is a really, really key thing because there are so many people out there putting out different sources of information and they conflict directly with each other. So to develop your ability to do this is really key. And like one simple thing you can do is look at what are known as logical fallacies. And these are a lot of arguments that are presented by various sources, but they basically step outside the real argument and present a false argument. And they are ways to mislead people and influence people, but not based on valid information. And if you simply learn a little bit about that and realize that that's a possibility and have some initial skepticism, you'll be much better able to know what sources of information to trust. For example, even things that we're told are extremely trustworthy, like peer-reviewed scientific papers. People within the scientific establishment themselves admit that more than half of the conclusions or findings in those papers are false. So if we don't come with a skepticism at our base when we look at this information, we're going to be misled all the time. And so this is really key. And this actually is common sense in your day-to-day life too, because you know how to avoid being, ripped off or conned, because we've all had people approach us, trying to take advantage and get our money. And you would use, very similar kind of thinking and reasoning in this respect. But so it's important to, one, know how to get valid, reliable, and trustworthy information, and then trust yourself that you have the ability to understand these scientific concepts.
Thank you. Stefan, what's your opinion on that?
Well, I recommend to go into history and to go really deep. And then you'll see that when you are in this thinking of materialistic interaction, which is the very base of our biology and which is actually the base of science since nearly 2,500 years, then from this point of view, you have only this kind of explanations what we have nowadays. For me, it was very important to get this because when I was young, I believed that those claims on viruses, infectious diseases, and cancer are based on fraud, on scientific fraud, and probably on political fraud, because I could not imagine that it's so easy when you look at it, that nobody's aware of it. But then, slowly but surely, I tried to find somebody, and I know a lot of them, who do claims against better knowledge. And I'm absolutely sure they are not. It's our context. If you are in a mindset that life is only explained by materialistic interactions, you are forced into the thinking of defect, that there are some strange life forms, they only eat, take away, destroy, and not able to give. And then you are in a dead end. And you are forced to think like this. If you think that we are originated out of cells and only matter matters, then you are forced to believe into a plan of our body, of our functioning, a building map, so our genetic material. So you are forced to think it's like this. And because everything, other explanations which are there were cut off and declared as anti-scientific. So to have an eye on the history, how all those concepts evolved and when, then it helps you to easily ask yourself for a better explanation, right? And this better explanation, that's my second point, is there. It was a German medical doctor who in the beginning of with the year 81 realized that what we are called psychosomatic, that this is the very base of most of disease, except severe intoxication or lack of substances, of course. But he realized the most important thing, that you can only judge it on an individual level, how an impact from the outside is acting on you. And the good thing, what he realized that in a technique called computer tomography, you can see the signals in the brain, right? And so he could map the whole body, and he could see only the brain scan of somebody and could tell what he had. what he has and what he's going to develop in future when a certain trauma it's resolved, right? So this is the so-called new medicine, and they call it also the term new medicine. I'm not happy with this term. And it was Dr. Ulrike Gerd-Hamer who came across this, and I was happy to run into him in the year 2000. And so I could throw my scientific anchor, which I had not before, because I only knew that all the concepts, immunology, infectiology, genetics, it's flawed, completely, deeply flawed, but I could not answer the question, what is health and how it happened? And only when I ran into this body of information, it became clear to me, and I'm very happy. So this is, I can recommend everybody to go into this. And then he automatically sees, well, it can't possibly be that something out from the outside is jumping in you, hijacking your body, your metabolism, and destroying, doing harm, or even killing you. That's not possible knowing the real biology. And the third point is, in order to help people to identify in this seemingly complex issue of virology, I outlined 7 points what virologists are doing. They are doing 7 claims. And if you check this and read the short pieces in their papers, material and methods, only in this chapter, material and methods, what they are actually doing. And probably you have to learn 10 specific terms, but then you know it and see on yourself, losing the hypnotical fear on viruses, then you see that in every step, they are disproving themselves on their own. And that's the good message for us. Of course, not for them, of course. It's very hard to realize that all what you've done, it's not useful. At the contrary, it's harmless, it's harmful, and it's deadly, you know, scaring people to death, vaccinate them, and all those antivirals and things and that. So, but anyway, this is what we are in, and the situation, it's clear. Either we stop this automatic craziness, which it's the result of 2,500 years of materialism, or everything goes down. Our economies goes down. All those handicapped people with vaccination and so, and then China is taking over. Okay, we have those 2 possibilities, decay or learning Chinese. I prefer the straight way to accept history, to confront the responsibles, but in a way that everybody is able to save his face. And knowing history, where those concepts came from, is helpful to show, well, it was not fraud, it's not fraud, but it's our feeling of life, which developed in the last 2,500 years, and which Plato hardly criticized, definitely.
Tom, do you want me to repeat the question, or to just?
I think the question was to do with how can people begin to understand virology?
Viruses and biology, yes.
Yeah, well, the one thing is to read Stefan's work. That's easy. And for me, I guess I would say I believe in my process, which is I consider it that until I can come up with a simple, understandable analogy that I can explain to anybody, then I don't really understand what I'm talking about. So that's my process, which is to explain this. Like Andy said, it turns out every single human being of, you know, reasonable intelligence can understand this perfectly well. And I think I can actually prove it to them. So the way I do that with viruses, and I'm sure some of you have heard this before, I switch the topic, because with talk about viruses, it's too it's too emotional and people have too much invested in it, both the virologists and the normal people. So I say, let's take an analogous situation. And the one I came up with was, imagine you have like me, I live on a street with lots of houses. And I go around the neighborhood and I look for pieces of paper debris outside of the houses. And more or less, you don't see paper debris, you know, a few labels and things, but you don't see paper spewed over people's lawns. So then you look and you don't see it. And then you come back 2 weeks later and 2 or 3 of the old decrepit houses, the house is totally gone and there's millions of bits of paper scattered all over the lawn. And the rest of the nice houses, they don't have any bits of paper. And so you say, what happened there? And then somebody from the university comes with a theory and he says, those little bits of paper that you couldn't find in the beginning, they got into your house, they reproduced themselves, they blew up your house, and now you have millions of bits of paper scattered over your lawn. It turns out Dostoevsky blew up your house. And if you hear that, and every human being, so now there's no emotional content, that's just nonsense. Everybody knows that the piece of paper didn't infect your house. Dostoevsky or Herman Melville or the New York Times didn't come and blow up your house. The reason there's these bits of paper is, and a little boy comes by and he says, oh, by the way, Tom, a week ago, I saw a demolition crew and they put some dynamite and they blew up your house. And that's why the house was blown up. And as I think Stefan has said, and Andy, there's nothing more to study in these bits of paper than just garbage. Now, there may be something you can learn that, like, this guy liked to read Dostoevsky, maybe a little more intellectual than the guy who read Mad Magazine, so he was a little bit of a whatever. But I mean, even not very much of that. And it turns out that when you look at virology, all we know is there's none of these particles in your well. And then if you get sick or you do a tissue culture, you see lots of particles. And every step in the middle is just basically make-believe, with actually no evidence to prove it. The same as the paper. Nobody saw the paper reproduce in your house. Nobody saw the paper explode your decrepit house. And it turns out to be, when you actually do the logic and the common sense and the science, it's the same. Every human being understands what I mean by that paper example. They somehow are convinced that the steps in between virology have been proven or worked out, or there's so many big words in there that they just don't understand. They can't possibly understand what a nucleotide is, or you know, a ribosome, which is made up, you know, all these things which so they think they can't understand it. And that's why I switched the model to something they do understand. And then you bring it back to the virology, it's the exact same thing. Now, whether that will work with humanity or not, or whether there's some other mechanism that we have to use to get people to see it, I mean, I guess we'll see. But that's how I try to do it.
Thank you. For the next part, I picked some topics that I thought you could each pick one and talk about it. I'll give you the words again. One of them is grassroots. One of them is the young people. And then we have campfire and democracy. I would like every one of you to pick one of these topics and just elaborate your thoughts about it. Grassroots is one, the young people, campfire, and democracy.
Beyond people, you said?
The young people.
The young people.
The young people.
Yeah.
which is important in this context. Maybe Stefan, would you like to start with one?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, for long years, I realized that it's very difficult to spread the information among adults because a lot of them have severe problem, with their jobs, with their family, I don't know what, and so they are not so able to move. They are not so flexible in changing their point of view. This is what I realized in 25 years of giving talks, So I focus myself really on young people because they are open. They are what's going on? What is the world offering me? So they are more open, and this is the reason why I'm on my way constructing an easy handling, an easy, and a less expensive brain scanner tool to get your brain mapped, and then on the results on your handy showing, look, you have this program, take care, your bone here is aching because of that reason there, that you have fever or using even hair or teeth, and this is going to attract the interest, in the technique-affine younger generation, to check the information behind. Because when you see it works, that the tool knows something about you, what you don't know on your own, then this is taking the attraction what we needed in order to have a change going on. And of course, what I'm telling when we speak about democracy, I mean, how can a democracy work when the one who are electing our responsibles are not controlling them, right? How could it be that we have secret services? A democracy and secret services, it's not possible. I mean, a state inside a state not being able to control what's going on. I mean, that's not possible. And of course, what I want to tell, I'm convinced we have to self-control in smaller units our state, our community from the bottom to the top. And what is part inside this is, of course, that we are aware that we have something like a money system. And we have also to focus on this, because if we are not, then we have, again, in the very important thing, doing exchange between each other with money, exchange medium. If we are not aware that there are injustices inside this, and the ones who are handling money, which should be there only for exchange, use it as a tool and as a powerful tool, to suppress all the other who are, dealing with milk or with cars or, with their own work only. And, so this is Silvio Gesell, who 100 years ago got it really clear. And this is very important to know and to tell. And of course, biology. I mean, if you are aware about your own biology, if you understand yourself, you are not judging the other anymore. And this is of greatest importance, to get a society based on peace and understanding and not on judging, because if you're not understanding your own, why you react in this way, then how you could judge another one on a real basis. So this is my points to these points. I may add, and the challenge is clear. Look, when we speak about corona or viruses, the challenge is much bigger than only viruses. Look, the one believing in cancer, in something bad, which is, evolving inside the body, then eating up and going, walking inside your body, the idea of metastasis. Sure, if you are believing this, then you are believing in mini metastasis, in viruses. So behind there's a bigger concept. We have to understand that it's not like this, and this is hard. We are afraid to see it, to watch into the light, because a lot of people suffered. Everybody knows somebody who died with a cancer diagnosis or terrible suffering, and this suffering, it's the proof that it's dangerous, right? The concept. So this is what we are what we have to challenge, and we have to consider every mean, every aspect, and there are more than I can see, of course. And so I'm very grateful that you are offering this podium for us, because everybody has to add another perspective on this, on our common challenge, what we have. And I mean, this is very decisive for our future.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Andy, would you like to pick one or two if you want?
Yeah, sure. Well, I like to weave a few of them together because I think they all really are interrelated inextricably. And, you know, to speak first about children, because that's really where my primary motivation comes from, because what I see is that children right now are being prepared to accept a very different future. One that limits social interaction and freedom substantially, right? We even see now children's toys appearing with masks and things like that to get children to accept that this is how people live, right? They see adults all around them this way, where, you know, you're afraid of diseases, you get vaccines, you do what you're told, you wear your mask, you stay away from people. And of course, this is going to have profound effects on the whole species because there'll be less reproduction, people will be depressed. You know, I mean, we're a social creatures. We need to be involved in relationships and community. And so what I see happening is, because we kind of are stuck with this fact that about 20% of the population is kind of easily influenced through hypnosis and things that play out like on the TV media, news channels with, you know, fear mongering and conditioning to change their behaviors and accept less and less freedom and responsibility over themselves. And so what I see is people like us kind of developing a parallel or separate new kind of society. And much of the ideals that Stefan talked about, you know, I see as developing. So in other words, economic systems, like in the vein of something called agorism, which arise out of, you know, the principles of equity rather than control and usury. So a system where, you know, there's no profiteering and control of the money system by any individual, that like it's simply there is a system where people exchange goods and services in a community so that they can all, you know, survive. So, you know, whereas I grow potatoes on my property and I trade potatoes to the rancher down the road who has eggs. Right. And of that kind of that's a barter economy, right, which doesn't work well for everything. But the idea is that we develop our own counter economic systems that work for everyone in a fair manner, and that no one has control over us, and that we have resources available to develop, you know, and support each other in communities, and that we can live, you know, much, much more freely under our own sovereignty and in cooperation with each other. And we can, you know, have sort of government almost by consensus, or we can have, you know, councils of wise elders that we go to and, you know, look back at some of the ways that people were successful living in smaller communities, you know, in historical settings in the past, because there really are good models for this that we've just have lost touch with because we don't look at history, you know, as Stefan pointed out earlier. And it's very important to have this context. But we all have to learn also how to do more for ourselves, how to take more responsibility, because, you know, with every bit of freedom that we're granted comes that responsibility that we can't rely on outside sources. We can't participate in things, you know, like insurance, for example, which is really just betting and profiteering, right? What we have to do is develop community so that when unforeseen circumstances occur, we help each other. And then we have to think about planning for our future. What, you know, what if we face hardship? How are we going to get through that? And those are, you know, difficult things for some people who are used to kind of always appealing to a higher authority and letting someone kind of tell them or what to do or rescue them. And so there has to be a philosophical change. But, you know, when you say democracy, I think what you really mean is freedom. And clearly in every system that we're exposed to, in virtually every nation around the world right now, we are losing freedom and the governments are taking it away from us. And we need to decide for ourselves if we're willing and to stay in that system and participate and give up those things, or if we're going to take charge of ourselves, look at the truth, the real truth of the situation, like we're talking about today, and make a different decision and, you know, rise up to the challenge of breaking, you know, the promise that you might have made earlier, and you know, changing the way that you make a living, changing the way that you do business, the way that you interact with systems, and kind of starting to separate yourself into something new that can actually, we can shift the health paradigm completely to one that's based on, you know, real scientific inquiry, and where we really take advantage of all of the knowledge that's been passed down to us from all these different traditions around the world, where we know that people can heal from all of these things without any of the modern trappings of allopathic medicine. And there's not just one way, there's many ways. And we can regain this knowledge and ability and actually, you know, live longer and healthier lives.
Great, thank you. Tom, you have an appointment later. Would you like to do this and then combine the last question so you can cut off earlier if you want, or would you like to stay and postpone your?
I can stay until 11:10, but
okay.
Yeah, so maybe I should start the next one. But
yeah,
let me say about young people, and I have two recent stories I heard about. I don't know the exact numbers here, so please don't hold me to the numbers. But one was, I had recently, 8-9 months ago, moved from San Francisco. And my wife actually recently read a story. This is a story about young people, that San Francisco General, which is the big public hospital in San Francisco, they have a psych unit, social care unit that handles teen suicides. And they, for years, they had maybe one, sometimes two teen suicides per month. And so they would have to deal with either the attempt or the actual suicide. Since the last 6 months, they have a one teen suicide attempt or success every single 12-hour shift, every shift. So they have to deal with some either attempt or actual completed suicide. The other story, I recently had a guy who came to see whether I had some mold in my basement, a really friendly guy. And his two jobs are remediating mold and cleaning up after homicides or suicides. And he also said that maybe one every 3 to 6 months, he would have a teen suicide, and he would actually, his crew would go in and, you know, clean up and stuff to help with the family. Now, every single day, he has a call in basically greater upstate New York for some sort of teen suicide, you know, success or completion. Unprecedented. He's been doing this for 30 years. So anybody who doesn't think this is having an unbelievably dramatic effect on teenagers and young people is simply not looking at the real world. The only other thing I would say is, if I was to say, there's lots of root causes of this problem, and Andy and Stefan, I think, gave really great descriptions of it. Let me add another one. And I also want to put this in the context of, there's really nothing new about what we're going through. It's different than it used to be because of technology, but I insisted, in spite of the publishers asking me not to put the story of Sleeping Beauty in the final chapter of my book. And people would say, what could possibly a story of Sleeping Beauty have to do with the Corona crisis? But the root of the problem is a human being deciding that they want to be safe, right? So that's why we do this. That's why you stay away from people. That's why you wear masks. That's why you get vaccines. That's why you live your life so you can be safe. Now, there's a precedent in this. So the story of Sleeping Beauty is there's a kingdom and there's a king and a queen, and they have a nice kingdom and it's prosperous, but they can't have a child. And so the kingdom can't go on. So then a frog, which in fairy tales is the representative of the spiritual world, says to the king and queen, I'm going to bestow the gift of a child on you. And so then the queen miraculously gets pregnant, and then they throw a party and they invite the 12 wise women of the kingdom. That, by the way, represents the wisdom of the universe. That's the zodiac. It's the months. But they forgot that there was a 13th woman who they didn't invite, who was, quote, the witch. And the witch is always depicted as the stepmother, which is basically materialism, right? The fallen wisdom, it's now a materialistic way of looking at the world. And the witch says, you're going to grow up and you're going to prick your finger and die. And then it turns out the 12th witch, the quote, good witch, hadn't spoken yet. So she said, this is a very powerful spell. I can't undo it, but I can turn it from you'll fall down dead to you'll just fall down asleep, right? So then the king and the queen and all the kingdom do exactly what we're doing now. They get rid of all the spindles and all the prickery things in the kingdom. Their goal is to make everybody safe. Well, at least the princess. The problem is the only time you're safe is when you're 6 feet under. That's it. If you're living, breathing human being, you encounter danger. That's how we grow and live. So inevitably, the princess grows up. Lo and behold, she pricks her finger. The whole country, the whole kingdom goes into lockdown, just like now. The bread makers can't make bread. The people can't go to work. There's no economic activity. They steal all your money. The whole kingdom is in lockdown. The princess is asleep. And then the kingdom is engulfed in a toxic thorns, right? Just like us. Toxic thorns, because we tried to be safe. That never works. Everybody's on lockdown, same as now. And then people try to save her, but they're killed by the thorns. Until one day, a young boy hears about it, and he hears about that there's this beautiful princess, and he could save her. And they say, no, don't do it, don't do it. You'll get killed like everybody else. And he says the words that solve this whole problem. You know what the words were? In every edition, he says, no, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I go in. What happens? The thorns part. The thorns have no power over somebody who's not afraid. What's the worst thing that can happen? You died. Yeah. You're going to die anyways. I don't want people to die, right? I don't want people to jump off cliffs for no reason. But if your goal is to be safe, you're dead. So he didn't care. He didn't know what was going to happen. He's not afraid, saves the princess, life goes on, we're all good. That's what we need to happen here.
For last, maybe Tom, you could start, because if you have to go, then you have to. Dare to ask. All of you are proof of constant learning. I think this is a chance for our humanity, and I wanted to ask you, what is your light? I mean, what do you read? What inspires you? What gets you up and going all the time? Maybe Tom, you want to start this time? So
Yeah.
we have.
You know, it's interesting because when you go into medicine and you ask people, why do you be a doctor? They say things like, well, I want to help humanity. And all I can say is, to a certain extent, I wish I could have said that. But the fact of the matter is, if I want to be honest, I never really thought of that. I only thought, this is an interesting thing for me to try to understand. Now, I wouldn't say I'm proud of that. That's just the fact. I thought it would be interesting to find out how a human being works and what I might be able to do to help them. Now, as time goes on, then people said, oh, by the way, I thought like you suggested, or I saw the world differently, or I ate differently, or I took this, and my life got better. And I would have the experience of, well, that's good. Like, that was a really good thing. I mean, I don't want to take that too far, but because that was just my experience. My point is, I think we should try to be a lot more real and a lot less abstract. That's just how I saw it. Now, when you get to who helped me along the way, I would say the main two people historically were actually Dostoevsky, because I was talking, he wrote this book, Crime and Punishment, which made me see in a realistic way my inner life. And I didn't really like that at the time, but it was so clear and dramatic that I saw, wow, there is an inner life and this guy knows how to describe it. And the second one was Ivan Illich, because Illich teaches you, don't believe anything. You know, the Viet Cong are going to win the war in Vietnam because the only two transportation systems that are better than a human foot are donkeys and one-speed bicycles, and that's what they've got. And you can't beat a group like that with planes and bombers. And he was right. He was right. And every single thing he said, I don't believe what they say. And fine, if you show me, you believe it. But he didn't believe it. And I just learned, because I used to laugh when I would read it, because I thought it was funny. Lately, then, I would say, if you want to know biology, if you're a medical person, a scientist, and I thank Stefan for this, not the second one, but the first one. If you haven't read Gilbert Ling and Harold Hillman, you don't know what's happening with biology, period. And I'm to the point where if you're a medical doctor and you question the science, and I know you haven't read Hillman and Ling, I don't even want to hear about it, because you haven't got even to the situation where you can even start to learn what's happening here.
Oh.
So I think I do need to go. And I just want to say thank you to Andy and Stefan and Dean. It's really incredibly heartwarming for me to be part of this. And I hope I can contribute something. And I just very grateful. I just can't say it enough.
Thank you for participating, and we all wish you a peaceful afternoon.
Okay. Can I leave this and it won't stop the...
Sure.
Yeah, we're good. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Bye, Tom.
Thank you.
So, shall we transition to Andy, maybe?
Sure. You want to just repeat the question for the audience?
Yeah, sure. The question was, what is your light, and what do you read, and who inspires you? What gets you going?
Well, this really didn't crystallize for me until during the last year, after some discussion and other things with my friend Jonathan. But I think I've always really been driven by justice, that this is a really important thing for me, and that when I identify injustices in the world, or, sometimes as a result of my own actions, as soon as I recognize that, I have this strong impulse to try and correct it. And I think that has really guided me throughout my life in a very significant way, without me quite realizing that was this principal force. And I think a corollary to that is that in order to determine the appropriate, justice of a situation, you really need to also have knowledge, and it has to be truthful knowledge, because that's how you make a determination of what is just versus unjust, or fair versus unfair. Because I don't want you to think that, I'm some kind of, crime buster, or that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about fairness, equity, and that type of justice. And so, for example, when I became a psychiatrist, I gravitated toward working in a, prison or jail setting. And because I felt that, and I already, had read about this, that a lot of people who are severely mentally ill get arrested and end up being kind of warehoused in penal facilities. And I wanted to be their advocate, and find out if there's ways I could help, or what's really going on with that situation. So I ended up working in those kind of settings, and and ultimately I realized actually it was such a toxic environment that it really was impossible to do any good work there. But really, I really disdain that situation. And it's the same thing going on at present, because we're talking about people having to totally change their lives because of, a threat that in this case is an illness, but turns out that threat doesn't really exist. So that's a serious breach of justice. And of course, what we talked about that young people are facing, and the dire consequences that Tom clearly described, and those, by the way, are all confirmed by even mainstream data, like on the CDC has done several surveys looking at that, for example, and there are other studies. So, what we're talking about here is, a huge breach of justice, because we are sacrificing the lives of our children, and whatever value there is there. And, this is being imposed upon us. So that is really kind of the main thing that motivates me. And what I read is really anything that's necessary to get a better understanding of the principles of morality and natural law, and of the details of what, is going on in these situations, so that I can really make a determination of where truth lies and what are my goals in trying to help, contribute to the bringing out of fairness and justice in the situation. And of course, for me, my passion is mostly related to health and biology, and understanding, the living organisms, and, maintaining our health and vitality. So I look at things through that lens, and I read, of course, material pertinent to that. But, I always look for inspiration, and sometimes it comes in unexpected places.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Very important. Yeah, my light, I think, has very much to do with my father. He disappeared as a youngster from Czechoslovakia after World War II, because it became a dictatorship. And I always was kept saying, the wall is going to fall down, definitely. I was absolutely sure the wall was not there before, and and my father considered me to be crazy. No, it's like this. And well, when as a young boy I was in Czechoslovakia, I realized something which I never experienced here: a certain kind of cleverness and happiness in those countries. I've been to Czechoslovakia, Poland, Russia, and I met such great people and a certain kind of self-confidence independently of your materialistic status. And that was very impressive for me. And for me was clear, hey, in such a situation, I would love in future, not judging you, but giving you a smile in order to get a smile, to give and to get. And this is what I realized as a young boy, and this was always driving me. And then, of course, I had the luck to get some great teachers directly, the one showing me how life is endangered by intoxication of the environment. And so I went into marine biology instead of chemistry. And then, of course, Erwin Chargaff, very important person. Then Tom mentioned Ivan Illich. I had the luck to meet him in person, and only afterwards to realize how deep thinker and sharp thinker he was, and he was warning against any how to say, when you have a body of knowledge and you make an academy out of it, if you institutionalize the body of wisdom, it's always very dangerous. And there he was very sharp, and so I was grateful, and I'm grateful for Ivan Illich. And then, of course, it was Hamer, Rieke Gerd Hamer, who took away the fear out of me. Look, because I was afraid of cancer, because I saw friends dying on cancer. And so this affected me very heavy. And then when I realized and checked his evidence, wow, the fear went away. And I mean, this is such a great living. And of course, automatically, if you experience this, you want to have this feeling to share this feeling with others, because it's great, it's nice, and it was never, it's sure that I have to tell it and to investigate deeper. That's clear. That's no question. And so I said 10 years ago that the next pandemic is going to be really difficult to handle for us, because they planned already there, because the swine flu was such a failure. They had to burn all the vaccines, and so they said we are going to control the internet. And therefore, this is one part why it became so mad today and obvious and religion. But on the other side, I'm very happy for Corona. It's a cleaning thing. It's a healing phase, for this 2,500 years of materialism. And I hope that we can jump into a better level of understanding. If not, we have to repeat the history. And I mean, the Chinese are going to teach us, very quickly, So anyway, Hamer, it's very important, because from a biological point of view, he took away the fear. And then when I saw his tabella work, where every part of the body was mentioned, what kind of disease you're going to enroll when you experience a trauma there, I mean a biological conflict. And so all of a sudden, when I saw his work printed out on a paper, and I turned it into the positive, I realized, hey, everybody, every piece of the body, outside, inside, every bone has a consciousness of its own. Because a word can change it. A word can change your flesh. A word can kill you. A word can heal you. A thought even can heal you. Or prayer. I mean, and so I found my way back into spirituality, into belief, because I realized, hey, I'm a materialization of some body context, consciousness for every organ, every part. And so from the logic, you have to think that everything which you will see represents a consciousness, a conscious being, which is materializing for a time being, you know. And I find when you ask me what I'm reading, it is this small booklet from Brandy Smileford, which is so great. I was reading a bigger book on his life, and he brings those principles, those spiritual principles, to such an easy expression. So this is my average day Bible, you know, to look in, or, you know, sometimes if I'm, you know, fear comes back, or I'm angry, so I only just have to read a little bit, and then everything gets blown away. And yeah, the most important book which helped me very much, or not book, but author, it's Eugen Rosenstock, who's a genius thinker, you know, and he helps me very much to orientate myself even deeper and better in history, and also for future. And he has foreseen everything what's going on in history, and shows what is necessary today. He was a historian of right, and then he became a sociologist. And I recommend everybody to read this, and this helps you to orientate yourself in this crisis, which is not a crisis, but a big change, to learn finally from history, and that humanity is jumping on a higher level of understanding and a higher level of respect, and all those words, name it love.
Oh, wonderful. Well, that was very inspiring from all of you. And I think we can leave it at that if it's fine for you. Or Andy, do you have a last word?
I just want to thank you so much for doing this, Dean, and Stefan. It's great to be a part of this endeavor, and I hope we continue this forward.
Hopefully too, yes. So thank you for participating, and all of you, I wish you a very peaceful afternoon or evening in our areas. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.